Hello and welcome to this week's Time on the Terrain. As you can see, I'm here in my home office, and a quick caveat that my wife and daughter are here and may at some point come bursting in. That's more likely to be the daughter than the wife, but we'll see how we go. Look, this week, as in previous Time on the Terrains, I just really want to share with you some of the insights that we, 4i, have gleaned out in the world of leadership this past week. And the primary one, the main topic for conversation, is what I'm going to frame as regenerative resilience. I mentioned this and discussed this pair of terms with Dr. Adam Fraser in now the one before last Better World Leaders episode. And essentially what I was recalling was I believe it's an article, I still haven't been able to find it, but something I was recalling from some time ago that looked at two modes of resilience: brittle resilience and the term that I recall them using, regenerative resilience. And I'm now going to apply this to myself and to one conversation in particular I had with a fellow leader client this week. But I'm kind of seeing this more and more, especially from those leaders who are really at the forefront of sort of crisis decision making right now, and in Australia in particular are sort of state level leaders, that the sort of, and what I discussed with Dr. Adam, the conventional view of resilience being that essentially you just kind of keep adding layers, right? You either learn new skills, you sort of test yourself over time, but basically you keep getting stronger by building additional layers, like layers of skin or extra layers of armor. And that the challenge with that is that whilst it might make those barriers more, sort of basically make them harder to penetrate, it might make you more resilient to external threats. What it doesn't do is it doesn't essentially sort of feed the core of you. And therefore, over an extended period of time, these barriers actually become baggage. This is now an enormous structure that you've got to carry around all the time. And if you can't maintain it, essentially it reaches a point where it just collapses in a big heap. And we see this at an organizational level with very, very large organizations that just all of a sudden fall to pieces when they get a shock. And I think we could relate this in some way to Nadim Taleb's theory of anti-fragility, which I'll come back to in a moment. But the opposite form of this, and when Dr. Adam Fraser and I discussed this, his view was essentially, absolutely, that's what it's all about. And then we went into his research, looking at essentially what leaders really need to do and how they can sustain themselves and come at resilience from a different way. And this has been my experience with myself, right? I have been running really, really bloody hard the last few months, taking on a lot of stuff. More hats and more hats. And what I haven't been doing is focusing enough on self-care and really what's most important. And that is, my ability to sustain my output and keep moving forward and honoring and loving and being kind to those that are dearest to me. My family, those in my team, and our most advocative of clients. I don't know if advocative is a word, probably not. But anyway, what you need to do is you need to have sort of restorative, regenerative time in order to keep coming back in a stronger mode. And, my interpretation of the anti-fragility theory is essentially one of the reasons why, Nadim Taleb's view, the economy is an example of an anti-fragile entity. It's not just about the strong keeping going and the weak dying off on the side every time there's an economic shock. It's that those that do keep moving and progress and grow and have this sort of post-traumatic growth phase out of a shock, those are the ones who sort of essentially reinvest the most in themselves, which at a corporate and an organizational level is a form of well-being. They sort of look at the structures and processes and they tweak and they tinker and they really sort of drill down into what's most important. And the conversation I had with a client during the week, was basically one where I posed this question to them: how do you decide who to invest in now? This is an entity which has had a massive contraction in revenue. They've had a dramatic reduction in resources that they can invest in developing their people, which is something that they've typically done systematically and very progressively, and now they just simply can't afford to do it in the way that they have been doing it. But the discussion that then followed that question being posed was really one around analyzing, who are the key drivers of your organization right now? And then how do you best enable those people to do their best work right now? And then what can you invest? What is the best mode of enabling them to sustain their performance and do their best work? And that, from our perspective at 4i means we were discussing, well, do they need a coaching intervention? Do they need some training group or a large group? That we actually fundamentally now need different capability. So the question really was a sort of a circular one that got us to a point with them saying, right, these are people, and we identified them based on alignment of values, really sort of stepping into the purpose of the organization and showing an extraordinary level of commitment, almost devotional level commitment. And what was interesting is that these people were not the people at the top. They were people sort of in the middle, your key engine of leadership, in the sort of middle and upper middle quadrant of the organization from a hierarchical perspective. Those were the people that this CEO identified had most stepped up and stepped in to driving the business forward through this very tumultuous period. So those were the people that we then drew up a list of what we thought, and we'll now go and test, in dialogue and in assessments with them, will be the best way to invest in them. And that, to me, is a perfect example of an organization that is going to become regeneratively resilient, being very precise in how they can invest the now meager resources that they have at their disposal, but very strategically to sustain their performance, to enable the organization through the key influencers and drivers to keep going, keep getting back up after the revenue hits that they keep having, and to keep moving forward and keep thinking about new and different ways to do things. And that is what I'm going to be trying to do myself, and what we will be doing and endeavoring to do at 4i and keep going. And that is the view of the landscape and the time on the terrain that we've had. Some of that have been helpful. If you now might be considering this question of who I invest in my team, of course, I'd love to have a conversation with you and try and help get to the basis or the genesis of what you should do and how you can do that. So feel free to send me a direct message or pick up the phone. My contact details are wherever I would hope they need to be: LinkedIn, website, etc., etc. If not, then I hope something in this has been of interest to you, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next edition of Time on the Train next week. See you there.